You've heard of there are hard acts to follow. Um, Someone said, I think that Jackie Wilson was famous for don't follow Jackie Wilson. I think James Brown said he left a hole in the stage, but I've never heard an introduction that was this hard to follow. So thank you so much for that. And I kind of wish it's such a special thing that you've never introduced anybody and you're introducing a poet, and I sort of wish that. Like every poet in America could have that same, no, it's just me and Carly. You don't have those other people in here. So, right, so thank you for those great words. So I'm going to read some newer poems to begin with, and then some older ones, and then you'll notice a pattern of improvement as the evening goes on. There must be a few people in here. This is a rarefied bit of knowledge, but has anyone ever heard of the Tennessee fainting goats? Yes. Yeah, a few people. Okay. Well, Tennessee fainting goats with a T, not ghosts, but the animal. And they live up to all three parts of their names. And I heard about them just a little while ago and reached for a pen. And the poem is called Down on the Farm. Whenever the conversation turns to the subject of Tennessee fainting goats, the question that always comes up is why? Are they so squeamish that they faint like Victorian ladies whenever the farmer uses language unbecoming a gentleman? Or is it catching? One goat fainting because he sees another one fainting. But that still leaves open the question of what makes the first goat faint. Does the memory of having keeled over one morning make one keel over again? Are they in love? Or is it all just too much? No one seems to know for sure, but it's something to think about when I'm trying to get to sleep at night, or when I'm looking out a window at the barn and the fenced-in pastures beyond. To see a goat stiffen before pitching over on its side with a thump is truly unnerving. But when he rises in a minute or two, as if from the dead, and goes back to munching with his head down in the sweet grass on these hillsides, then everything seems okay again, just like before. Thank you. Here's another little question about an esoteric thing. Do you know what a snood is? Some of you know. Yeah, it's sort of, I guess, for ladies, usually, originally, a kind of like a net to put your hair in. It comes back like that. And so I think some kind of Brooklyn guys are wearing snoods these days. But I'm guessing they don't know it's called a snood. And every time I see one of them, I just kind of mumble to myself, nice snood, buddy. I do that. So that's the only word in the poem that's a little unusual. And it's called Safe Travels. Every time Gulliver travels into another chapter of Gulliver's Travels, I marvel at how well-traveled he is, despite his incurable gullibility. I don't enjoy traveling anymore myself because, for instance, I don't know the difference between a bloke and a chap. And I'm embarrassed whenever I have to hold out a palm of loose coins to a cashier as if I were feeding a pigeon in the park. Like Proust, I see only trouble in store if I leave my room, which is not lined with cork, only sheets of wallpaper featuring orange flowers and little green vines. Of course, anytime I want, I can travel in my imagination, but only as far as Toronto, where some graduate students with goatees and snoods are translating my poems into Canadian. There was a little spider on this microphone, and I kind of blew him away, and then he climbed back up a few times, but now he's gone for good. But this is a little poem about a spider. Not you, the spider. It's called Irish Spider. It was well worth traveling this far just to sit in a box of sunlight by a window in a cottage with a cup of steaming tea, and to watch an Irish spider waiting at the center of his dewy web, pretending to be just any spider at all, a spider without a nation, but not fooling me for a minute. Anyway, this is a little time. The little time gets sort of oddly segmented in so many different ways. And this, I mentioned a jazz guy named Eric Dolphy, you probably know, plays alto saxophone and flute and lots of other things. Eric Dolphy. And it's called Tipping Point. At home, the jazz station plays all day, so sometimes it becomes indistinct, like the sound of rain, birds in the background, the surf of traffic. But today I heard a voice on the radio say, today is the birthday of Eric Dolphy, and that Eric Dolphy, who died at 36, has now been dead for 36 years. I wonder, did anyone sense something when another Eric Dolphy lifetime was added to the span of his life, when we all took another full Dolphy step forward in time, flipped over the Eric Dolphy yardstick once again? It would have been so subtle, like the sensation you might feel as you pass through the moment at the exact middle of your life, or as you cross the equator at night in a boat. I never gave it another thought, but could that have been the little shift I sensed a while ago as I walked down in the rain to get the mail? Thank you. Yeah. Well, there's a question that comes up in our minds that is, I think most of our minds. That's a question I think we want to brush away quickly. It's not something we want to dwell on, I think we're almost ashamed of thinking of it. But the question is, who goes first? And you can apply it to parents or spouses. Or a friend of mine said he was kept awake at night wondering which one of the Everly Brothers would die first. So I thought I would just try to turn that into a poem. And it's called Me First. We often fly in the sky together, and we are always okay. There's our luggage now waiting for us on the carousel. And we drive lots of places in all manner of hectic traffic. Yet here we are, pulling in the driveway again. So many opportunities to die together. But no meteor has hit our house. No tornado has lifted us into its funnel. The odds say then that one of us will go before the other, like heading off into a heavy snowstorm, leaving the other one behind to stand in the kitchen or lie on the bed under the fan. So why not let me, the older one, go first? I don't want to see you everywhere as I wait for the snow to stop before setting out with a crooked stick, calling your name. Thank you. Thank you. And this is a little kind of a poem about losing visual perspective. Like a lot of us, I do a lot of traveling, and so it's about those things you find in the waiting for you in the bathroom. It's called Hotel Rex. Looming over the little sewing kit and the miniature bottles of shampoo and conditioner, I am a giant. A king standing before the royal mirror in an enormous robe of terry cloth. As a sign of my benevolence, I will forego coffee and the morning paper from room service and check out early before my tiny subjects arrive to wash their hair and mend their simple attire. I should title the book Stuff You Think About, or Stuff I Think About. This poem has a slightly unusual word, mulishness, which just means acting stubbornly like a mule. And the title is Imperial Gardens, which is a Chinese restaurant. Sorry to disappoint you, but Imperial Gardens. It was at the end of dinner, the two of us in a red booth, maintaining our silence, when I decided to compose a message for the fortune cookie you were soon to receive. Avoid mulishness when choosing a position on the great board game of life, was my wordy, mean-spirited gift to the treasury of ancient wisdom. But while we waited for the cookies, the slices of oranges, and the inescapable pot of watery tea, I realized that by mulishness, I meant your refusal to let me have my own way every time I wanted it. I watched you looking off to the side, your massive dark hair, your profile softened by lamplight, and then I made up a fortune for myself. He who acts like a jerk on an island of his own creation will have only the horizon for a friend. I seemed to be getting worse at this, I thought, as the cookies arrived at the table with the orange slices and a teapot painted with tigers peering out menacingly from the undergrowth. The restaurant was quiet then. The waiter returned to looking out the street. A zither whimpered in the background. And we turned to our cookies, crumbling the brittle shells, then rolling into little balls the tiny scrolls of our fortunes before dropping them unread into our cups of tea, a little good luck thing we've been doing ever since we met. Thank you. And this is a poem called I Am Not Italian. I am not Italian. I am not Italian, technically speaking. Yet here I am leaning on a zinc bar in Florence on a sunny weekday morning, my foot up on the smooth iron railing, just like the other men who, it must be said, are officially and completely Italian. It's 8:40 in the morning, and they are off to work, some in offices, others sweeping the streets, while I am off to a museum or a church to see paintings, maybe light a candle in an alcove. Yet here we all are in our suits and work shirts, joined in the brotherhood of espresso, or how is it said, la fraternazza dell'espresso, draining our little white cups with a quick flourish of the wrist, each of us tasting the same sweetness of life, if you take a little sugar, and the bitterness of its brevity, whether you take sugar or not. Thank you so much. So I'll read a few poems from this newer book, still the new book, The Rain in Portugal. And this is just called 1960. In the old joke, the marriage counselor tells the couple who never talks anymore to go to a jazz club, because at a jazz club, everyone talks during the bass solo. But of course, no one starts talking just because of a bass solo, or any other solo for that matter. The quieter bass solo just reveals the people in the club who have been talking all along. The same ones you can hear on some well-known recordings. Bill Evans, for example, who is opening a new door into the piano, while some guy chats up his date at one of the little tables in the back. I have listened to that album so many times, I can anticipate the moment of his drunken laugh, as if it were a strange note in the tune. And so, anonymous man, you have become part of my listening, your romance, a romance lost in the past, and a reminder somehow that each member of that trio has died since then, and maybe so have you, and sadly, maybe she. Thank you. I've written a lot of poems about, or some poems about dogs, but Suzanne and I have 2 cats now. I don't know. Well, I know how it happened, but anyway, there they are. There they jolly well are. So they got written about. So this is called Lucky Cat. Lucky Cat. It's a law as immutable as the ones governing bodies in motion and bodies at rest, that a cat picked up will never stay in the place where you choose to set it down. I bet you'd be happy on the sofa, or on this hassock, or this knitted throw pillow, are a few examples of bets you are bound to lose. The secret of winning, I have found, is never to bet against the cat, but on the cat, preferably with another human being who, unlike the cat, is likely to be carrying money. And I cannot think of a better time to thank our cat for her obedience to that law, thus turning me into a consistent winner. She's a pure black one, quite impossible to photograph, and prone to disappearing into the night, or even into the thin shadows of noon. Such an amorphous blob of blackness is she. The only way to tell she is approaching is to notice the 2 little yellow circles of her eyes. Then only one circle when she is walking away, with her tail raised high. Something like the lantern signals of Paul Revere. American silversmith, galloping patriot. So many of these poems really, when poems are studied in class and that kind of thing, or discussed, we think about themes. This poem is about the search for the father, or grieving, or celebration of love, or whatever. But I think for most poets, and certainly for me, that as the poem is being written, we're really thinking of one thing only, and that is, how do you get out of it? How do you come to a point where you feel there's a settlement, and where I don't want to say anymore and you don't want to hear anymore? But often it's something like Paul Revere, who was truthfully the last thing on my mind when I started writing about the cat. But but you get to recognize the appearance of these saviors, and that I realized. As soon as I thought of him, that's the end. He let me out. Yeah. A poem called "Only Child." Probably some of you out there. I think there's a book signing afterward, and if you are an only child, you can just come up to the front. There's a special line for you, because you deserve it. Anyway. Only child. I never wished for a sibling, boy or girl. Center of the universe, I had the back of my parents' car all to myself. I could look out one window, then slide over to the other window without any quibbling over territorial rights. And whenever I played a game on the floor of my bedroom, it was always my turn. Not until my parents entered their 90s did I long for a sister, a nurse I named Mary. who worked in a hospital 5 minutes away from their house, and who would drop everything, even a thermometer, whenever I called. Be there in a jiff and on my way were two of her favorite expressions. And now that the parents are dead, I wish I could meet Mary for coffee every now and then at that Italian place with the blue awning, where we would sit and reminisce, even on rainy days. I would gaze into her green eyes and see my parents, my mother gazing out of Mary's right eye, and my father staring out of her left, which would remind me of what an odd duck I was as a child. A little prince and a loner who would break off from his gang of friends on a Saturday and find a hedge to hide behind. And I would tell Mary all about that too, and never embarrass her by asking about her non-existence. And maybe we would have another espresso and a pastry, and I would always pay the bill and walk her home. Thank you. Let's see. Here's a poem called, let's see where we are. We're good. A poem called Cheerios. Just a fairly short poem, Cheerios. One bright morning in a restaurant in Chicago, as I waited for my eggs and toast, I opened the Tribune, only to discover that I was the same age as Cheerios. Indeed, I was a few months older than Cheerios, for today the newspaper announced was the 70th birthday of Cheerios, whereas mine had occurred earlier in the year. Already I could hear them whispering behind my stooped and threadbare back, "Why, that dude's older than Cheerios." The way they used to say, "Why, that's as old as the hills." Only the hills are much older than Cheerios or any American breakfast cereal, and more noble and enduring are the hills, I surmised, as a bar of sunlight illuminated my orange juice. Thank you. And this is a little poem that's a kind of tribute to, it's the kind of poem that a poet writes in tribute to an earlier poem. And of course there's a lot of covert activity that goes on when poets kind of ransack anthologies and other books of poets and steal from them, or just take the lead from them. But this is a very overt way of doing it, and there's a etiquette for it, and that is that you use the same name as the original poem, and under that, as many of you know, you write after and then the poet's name, so after Neruda or after Rexroth. In this case, I wanted to write some kind of version of a poem by the Chinese poet Li Po, and he has a beautiful little poem called Drinking Alone. And I thought, well, I've done that enough, and I might have something to say about that. But then when I wrote down after Li Po, I really forgot what I had to say about it, but set out anyway. Drinking Alone after Li Po. This is not after Li Po the way the state is after me for neglecting to pay all my taxes, nor the way I am after the woman in front of me on the long line at the post office. Li Po, I am not saying after you, as I stand holding open one of the heavy glass doors that divide the centuries in a long corridor of glass doors. No, the only way this is after you is in the way they say, it's just one thing after another, like the way I will pause to raise a glass of wine to you after I finish writing this poem. So let me get back to sitting in the wind alone among the pines with a pencil in my hand. After all, you had your turn, and mine will soon be done. Then someone else will sit here after me. It's all about mortality. That's the main thing. I tell students, we're going to have a class in English poetry, but it's really a class in death. Because the bluebird or the blackbird of mortality just flies over the page so often, and it's sort of the magnetic north that poems tend to go to as they're being written. But I think this is not the case, oddly. This is about attempting an adult, it's a staging of an adult talking to a teenager, someone who, as my friend said, is committing adolescence. And it's called To My Favorite 17-Year-Old High School Girl. Do you realize if you had started building the Parthenon on the day you were born, you'd be all done in only one more year? Of course, you couldn't have done that alone, so never mind. You're fine just as you are. You are loved for simply being yourself. But did you know that at your age, Judy Garland was pulling down $150,000 a picture? Joan of Arc was leading the French army to victory, and Blaise Pascal had cleaned up his room? No, wait, he's the one who invented the calculator. Of course, there'll be time for all that later in your life, after you come out of your room and begin to blossom, or at least pick up all your socks. For some reason, I keep remembering that Lady Jane Grey was Queen of England when she was only 15, but then she was beheaded, so never mind her as a role model. But a few centuries later, when he was your age, Franz Schubert was doing the dishes for his family, but that did not keep him from composing 2 symphonies, 4 operas, and 2 complete masses as a youngster. But of course, that was in Austria at the height of romantic lyricism, not here in the suburbs of Cleveland. Frankly, who cares if Annie Oakley was a crack shot at 15, or if Maria Callas debuted as Tosca at 17? We think you are special by just being you, playing with your food and staring into space. By the way, I lied about Schubert doing the dishes, but that doesn't mean he never helped out around the house. Supposed to say bless her heart after that. And this is a title of one of my books. It's called Aimless Love. And it's really if it was an essay, and I'm glad it's not, it wouldn't get a good grade. But if it were an essay, it would be a comparison and contrast formula. Aimless Love. This morning, as I walked along the lakeshore, I fell in love with a wren, and later in the day, with a mouse the cat had dropped under the dining room table. In the shadows of an autumn evening, I fell for the seamstress, still at her machine in the tailor's window, and later for a bowl of broth, steam rising like smoke from a naval battle. This is the best kind of love, I thought, without recompense, without gifts or unkind words, without suspicion or silence on the telephone. The love of the chestnut, the love of the jazz cap, one hand on the steering wheel. No lust, no slam of the door. The love of the miniature orange tree, the clean white shirt, the hot evening shower, that highway that cuts across Florida. No waiting, no huffiness or rancor, just a twinge every now and then for the wren, who had built her nest on a low branch overhanging the water, and for the dead mouse, still dressed in its light brown suit. But my heart is always propped up in a field on its tripod, ready for the next arrow. After I carried the mouse by the tail to a pile of leaves in the woods, I found myself standing at the bathroom sink, gazing down affectionately at the soap, so patient and soluble, so at home in its pale green soap dish. I could feel myself falling again as I felt its turning in my wet hands and caught the scent of lavender and stone. Thank you. So if you're a poem writer, you wouldn't want to say lavender and roses, right? You have to say lavender and stone, right? It's too soft the other way. Just a tip. I don't know if you ever come to the last line of a poem that has lavender in it, just put a stone in there. Here's a dog, just a dog thinking to itself. And it's thinking about its master. It's only a fairly short poem. It's like maybe a little dog soliloquy. It's only 12 lines long. And it's called A Dog on His Master. As young as I look, I am growing older faster than he. 7-to-1 is the ratio they tend to say. Whatever the number, I will pass him one day and take the lead, the way I do on our walks in the woods. And if this ever manages to cross his mind, it would be the sweetest shadow I have ever cast on snow or grass. Thank you. And then there's this other kind of dog who is also speaking to us in a poem, a little longer poem called The Revenant, and that's just a big word for a ghost, right? A ghost who pays visitations. The Revenant. I am the dog you put to sleep, as you like to call the needle of oblivion. Come back to tell you this simple thing: I never liked you. When I licked your face, I thought of biting off your nose. When I watched you toweling yourself dry, I wanted to leap and unman you with a snap. I resented the way you moved, your lack of animal grace, the way you would sit in a chair to eat, a napkin on your lap, a knife in your hand. I would have run away, but I was too weak, a trick you taught me while I was learning to sit and heel, and greatest of insults, shake hands without a hand. I admit the sight of the leash would excite me, but only because it meant I was about to smell things you had never touched. You do not want to believe this, but I have no reason to lie. I hated the car, hated the rubber toys, disliked your friends, and worse, your relatives. The jingling of my tags drove me mad. You always scratched me in the wrong place. All I ever wanted from you was fresh water and food in my metal bowls. While you slept, I watched you breathe as the moon rose in the sky. It took all of my strength not to raise my head and howl. Now I am free of the collar, free of the yellow raincoat, monogrammed sweater, the absurdity of your lawn. And that is all you need to know about this place, except what you already supposed and are glad it did not happen sooner, that everyone here can read and write, the dogs in poetry, the cats and all the others in prose. Thank you so much. I know there are some younger people in the audience, but I think I could still read this poem called Hangover. If you don't know what that is, it's just daddy has a bad headache. It's something like that. Anyway, so it's called Hangover. If I were crowned emperor this morning, every child who is playing Marco Polo in the swimming pool of this motel, shouting the name Marco Polo back and forth, Marco Polo, Marco Polo, would be required to read a biography of Marco Polo, a long one with fine print, as well as a history of China and of Venice, the birthplace of the venerated explorer Marco Polo, Marco Polo, after which each child would be quizzed by me, then executed by drowning, regardless how much they managed to retain about the glorious life and times of Marco Polo. Thank you very much. Here are two little poems. I'm thinking of put out I love little poems, and usually when I get a book of poems in my hands by somebody else, I usually just flip through it like a flip book, looking for little poems to start with. And I've had so many of them, I'm thinking of having put a book together, and I might call it, Susanna helped me with the title, I might call it Tom Thumb's Thumbprint, just to indicate the size of them. Now, where are we here? Okay, so this is a tiny poem. Harking back maybe to the 17-year-old girl. Something about that poem, that was written for someone, and she didn't talk to me for a few years. Didn't think it was very funny. Even when I tried to tell her that the adult is just as much the butt of the joke, piling these ridiculously inflated expectations on the poor girl. But anyway, this might be of that girl's vintage. It's just 9 lines. It's called Oh My God, with an exclamation point. Oh my God, not only in church and nightly by their bedsides do young girls pray these days. Wherever they go, prayer is woven into their talk like a bright thread of awe. Even at the pedestrian mall, outbursts of praise spring unbidden from their glossy lips. And then this, this is a species of poem. This is only 4 lines long. That would make no sense, I don't think, without its title. And the title is Divorce. Divorce. You're applauding. That's an unusual reaction. Yeah, I was unapplauding. Anyway, 4 lines long, called Divorce. Once, 2 spoons in bed, now tined forks across a granite table, and the knives they have hired. So there. Let me read a couple of sort of silly poems that I wrote when I was in a silly mood and had nothing else to write about. And this was just something I heard on the radio, I think. It's called Hippos on Holiday. Let's see, it's right here. Okay. It's hiding. Oh, here it is. Hippos on Holiday. Hippos on Holiday is really not the title of a movie, but if it were, I would be sure to see it. I love their short legs and big heads, the whole hippo look. Hundreds of them would frolic in the mud of a wide, slow-moving river, and I would eat my popcorn in the dark of a neighborhood theater. When they opened their enormous mouths, lined with big stubby teeth, I would drink my enormous Coke. I would be both in my seat and in the water, playing with the hippos, which is the way it is with a truly great movie. Only a mean-spirited reviewer would ask, on holiday from what? Sorry, there's not much there, but I'll read one more of that genre. It's called Bathtub Families. Or, I don't know where the other one is. Okay, I'll read another. This is called This Little Piggy Went to Market. This little piggy went to market is the usual thing to say when you begin pulling on the toes of a small child, and I have never had a problem with that. I could easily picture the piggy with his basket and his trotters kicking up the dusk on an imaginary road. What always stopped me in my tracks was the middle toe. This little piggy ate roast beef. I mean, I enjoy a roast beef sandwich with lettuce and tomato and a dollop of horseradish, but I cannot see a pig ordering that in a delicatessen. I am probably being too literal-minded here. I am even wondering why it's called horseradish. I should just go along with the beautiful nonsense of the nursery, float downstream on its waters. After all, little Jack Horner speaks to me deeply. I don't want to be the one to ruin the children's party by asking unnecessary questions about Puss in Boots, or again the implications of a pig eating beef. By the way, I am completely down with going wee all the way home, having done that many times and knowing exactly how it feels. Thank you so much. They were saying that they were going to kind of deaden the sound by putting some stuff in the ceiling, but I like the applause. Applause, it sounds good. Well, this wasn't meant to be silly, but maybe you think it is. I don't know. It's called, it tries to give you a helpful title, and it's called I Chop Some Parsley While Listening to Art Blakey's version of Three Blind Mice. And I start wondering how they came to be blind. If it was congenital, they could be brothers and sisters. And then I think of the poor mother brooding over her sightless young triplets. Or was it a common accident, all three caught in a searing explosion, a firework perhaps? If not, if each came to his or her blindness separately, how did they ever manage to find one another? Would it not be difficult for a blind mouse to locate even one fellow mouse with vision, let alone two other blind ones? And how, in their tiny darkness, could they possibly have run after a farmer's wife? Or anyone else's wife, for that matter, not to mention why? Just so she could cut off their tails with a carving knife is the cynic's answer. But the thought of them without eyes and now without tails to trail through the moist grass has the cynic who always lounges within me up off his couch and at the window, trying to hide the rising softness that he feels. By now I'm on to dicing an onion, which might account for the wet stinging in my own eyes, though Freddie Hubbard's mournful trumpet on Blue Moon, which happens to be the next cut, cannot be said to be making matters any better. And then I want to read two poems that have, these are older poems that have something in common, I think, with each other. And the first one is called, it's a poem that I wrote some time ago, but it seems to be acquiring a growing audience. It's a poem called Forgetfulness. And I start by with a certain kind of forgetting, which someone called literary amnesia, which is just forgetting things that you read. Forgetfulness. The name of the author is the first to go, followed obediently by the title, the plot, the heartbreaking conclusion, the entire novel, which suddenly becomes one you have never read, never even heard of. It is as if one by one the memories you used to harbor decided to retire to the southern hemisphere of the brain, to a little fishing village where there are no phones. Long ago you kissed the names of the 9 muses goodbye and watched the quadratic equation pack its bag. And even now, as you memorize the order of the planets, something else is slipping away. A state flower, perhaps, the address of an uncle, the capital of Paraguay. Whatever it is you are struggling to remember, it is not poised on the tip of your tongue, not even lurking in some obscure corner of your spleen. It has floated away down a dark, mythological river whose name begins with an L, as far as you can recall. Well on your own way to oblivion, where you will join those who have forgotten even how to swim and how to ride a bicycle. No wonder you rise in the middle of the night to look up the date of a famous battle in a book on war. No wonder the moon in the window seems to have drifted out of a love poem that you used to know by heart. Thank you. I'll just read a couple more. This is a poem about someone who, a speaker, or at least imaginary character who can't forget anything, who remembers everything. The poem is called Nostalgia because it's a reference to something that happened in the. You remember the 20th century? Some parts of it. But in the 20th century, you'll recall, we had the habit of referring to the past in decades. We refer very glibly and knowingly to the 60s, and that's an 80s thing, and that kind of thing. As if time were just divided very conveniently into these bite-sized decades. And we were always, I thought, meant to feel a little nostalgic about the passing of these time slices. And that's why the poem is called Nostalgia. Remember the 1340s? We were doing a dance called the catapult. You always wore brown, the color craze of the decade. And I was draped in one of those capes that were popular, the ones with unicorns and pomegranates and needlework. Everyone would pause for beer and onions in the afternoon. And at night, we would play a game called Find the Cow. Everything was hand-lettered back then, not like today. Where has the summer of 1572 gone? Brocade and sonnet marathons were the rage. We used to dress up in the flags of rival baronies and conquer one another in cold rooms of stone. Out on the dance floor, we were all doing the struggle, while your sister practiced the Daphne all alone in her room. We borrowed the jargon of farriers for our slang. These days, language seems transparent, a badly broken code. The 1790s will never come again. Childhood was big. People would take walks to the very tops of hills and write down what they saw in their journals without speaking. Our collars were high and our hats were extremely soft. We would surprise each other with alphabets made of twigs. It was a wonderful time to be alive, or even dead. I am very fond of the period between 1815 and 1821. Europe trembled while we sat still for our portraits. And I would love to return to 1901 if only for a moment, time enough to wind up a music box and do a few dance steps, or shoot me back to 1922 or 1941, or at least let me recapture the serenity of last month when we picked berries together and glided through afternoons in a canoe. Even this morning would be an improvement over the present. I was in the garden then, surrounded by the hum of bees and the Latin names of flowers, watching the early light flash off the slanted windows of the greenhouse and silver the limbs on the rows of dark hemlocks. As usual, I was thinking about the moments of the past, letting my memory rush over them like water rushing over the stones on the bottom of a stream. I was even thinking a little about the future, that place where people are doing a dance we cannot imagine, a dance whose name we can only guess. Thank you very much. So I think I'll do one more poem, and we could have a question and answer, that would be fine if you want to do that. And I just want to thank so many people who have been so hospitable to us, and I can't even name them all, I forget most of them, but that we've been following Rose Styron, and we meet about 150 people a day doing that. But I need to thank her, we need to thank her immensely for taking care of us. And yeah. So I'll end with this poem called Aristotle, and it comes out of me looking at Aristotle's Poetics, and that passage especially where he talks about things, drama, and all sorts of things, being divided into the beginning, middle, and end. And this is quite a discovery for Aristotle, and he goes on about it at some length. And he says things like the middle comes before the beginning, and interesting things like that. So I wanted to write a poem that was at least well organized. So it's called Aristotle. This is the beginning. Almost anything can happen here. This is where you find the creation of light, a fish wriggling onto the land, the first word of Paradise Lost on an empty page. Think of an egg, the letter a woman ironing on a bare stage as the heavy curtain rises. This is the very beginning. The first-person narrator introduces himself, tells us about his lineage. The mezzo-soprano stands in the wings. Here the climbers are studying a map or pulling on their long woolen socks. This is early on, years before the ark, dawn. The profile of an animal is being smeared on the wall of a cave, and you have not yet learned to crawl. This is the opening, the gambit, a pawn moving forward an inch. This is your first night with her, your first night without her. This is the first part, where the wheels begin to turn, where the elevator begins its ascent before the doors lurch apart. This is the middle. Things have had time to get complicated, messy, really. Nothing is simple anymore. Cities have sprouted up along the rivers, teeming with people at cross purposes, a million schemes, a million wild looks. Disappointment unshoulders his knapsack here and pitches his ragged tent. This is the sticky part, where the plot congeals, where the action suddenly reverses or swerves off in some outrageous direction. Here the narrator devotes a long paragraph to why Miriam does not want Edward's child. Someone hides a letter under a pillow. Here the aria rises to a pitch, a song of betrayal salted with revenge, and the climbing party is stuck on a ledge halfway up the mountain. This is the bridge, the painful modulation, This is the thick of things. So much is crowded into the middle. The guitars of Spain, piles of ripe avocados, Russian uniforms, noisy parties, lakeside kisses, arguments heard through a wall. Too much to name, too much to think about. And this is the end. The car running out of road, the river losing its name in an ocean, the long nose of the photographed horse touching the white electronic line. This is the colophon, the last elephant of the parade, pigeons floating down in the evening. Here the stage is littered with bodies. The narrator leads the characters to their cells, and the climbers are in their graves. It is me hitting the period, and you closing the book. It is Sylvia Plath in the kitchen, and St. Clement with an anchor around his neck. This is the final bit, thinning away to nothing. This is the end, according to Aristotle, what we have all been waiting for, what everything comes down to, the destination we cannot help imagining, a streak of light in the sky, a hat on a peg, and outside the cabin, falling leaves.